So today we're going to look at comparing and ordering rational numbers. So remember, to compare we can use two of our symbols of inequality that are called greater than, that symbol there, greater than, and less than. Other things to keep in mind when you're comparing is thinking about those values on the number line. And so the larger values will always be to the right of the number line. So the larger values to the right. Okay, so for example, if we have a number line and let's place 0 in the middle, and as we go to the right the numbers increase. We'll count up using our natural numbers, our whole numbers, and then to the left we count down and the numbers are getting smaller. So our negative values are obviously smaller than our positive values. Other things to keep in mind, it's easiest to compare decimals with decimals and fractions with fractions. So if we're comparing our decimals, we can compare the decimal place values. Okay, and with our fractions, we can look at whole numbers if they're mixed numbers, or if the denominator is the same, then we can just simply look at the numerators. Okay, so a couple things, other things to keep in mind, that remembering that an even number of negatives will always mean that the value is positive. So for example, we know that negative 1 over negative 2, so two negatives, means that it's the same as positive 1/2. Or we can also look at the equivalent decimal value, which is 0.5. Either way, if we place that on a number line, we can see that if this is 0 and this is positive 1, we know that 1/2 is going to lie right in the middle between 0 and positive 1, and this being negative 1 down here. Conversely, if we have an odd number of negatives, will mean that the value is negative. So oftentimes we see the negative with the numerator, negative 1/2. However, we might also see the negative in the denominator, 1 over negative 2. Sometimes we see the negative sitting out front, so negative 1/2. And not very often, but at times we see negative of negative 1 over negative 2. And because it has 3 negatives, it's the same as just having 1 negative, or all of it being negative, equivalent decimal value being negative 0.5. So once again, let's take a look at our number line, and if we place 0 here, positive 1 here, negative 1 here, negative 1/2 will be between 0 and negative 1. Okay. So, and as with equivalent fractions that you guys have done lots of work with, to find equivalent fractions, you guys know that we multiply or divide both numerator and denominator by the same number. So let's just write equivalent fractions. May be found by multiplying or dividing the numerator and denominator by the same number. So again, for example, if we take -2/6, if I was to divide both the numerator and the denominator by 2, I would come up with an equivalent fraction of -1/3. Similarly, I could also multiply both numerator and denominator by -4, and I would come up with an equivalent fraction of +4 over -12. Okay. And to compare, let's take a look at comparing a couple of mixed numbers. Let's compare -1 3/4 to -1 2/3. So a simple way to look at this would be to convert them both into decimals, remembering that if we wanted to convert it into a decimal, numerator divided by denominator, knowing that we have the 1 as a whole number in front, so we're looking at -1.75, in this case -1.6 repeating, and because 1.75 is greater than 1.6 repeating, however it's negative, therefore we're looking at the opposite side of the number line. -1.75 or -1 3/4 will be less than -1 2/3. Okay, if we were again to look at that on a number line, we would see that 0 is here and +1. Got -1, and let's place -2 there. So we see that -1 3/4 is about right here, and let's change color. We can see then also that -1 2/3 is about there. If you're still not sure, another way to look at it is to think about them in the positive side, where we would place positive, that's a little too far over, +1 3/4 here, and when we take the opposite, it's directly on the opposite side of 0, and when we look at 1 2/3, it's here, and so because it's closer to 0 on the negative side or to the right, remember the further right it is, the greater the value. Okay, another way to go through it would be if you didn't have your calculator handy, or if you didn't know how to change them into decimals, we could also find a common denominator. So we've got -1 3/4, that would be the same as -1 9/12 by multiplying top and bottom by 3. On the other side we have -1 2/3, which is the same as -1 8/12. Again, because we're looking at negative values, 1 8/12 is going to be greater. Okay. Let's try one more kind of example. So if we have identify a mixed number between a pair of rational numbers, so let's take -1.4, 1 4/10, and -1 5/10. So easy way to think about this is, even though we need a mixed number or fraction, easier is almost looking at it in decimal form. And so if we think about it, this is really, we could have an infinite number of zeros after the 4, likewise an infinite number of zeros after the 5. So it makes it easier for us to see that we've got lots of options in between. So let's say we take -1.45 if we go right in the middle. And since we would read that as -1 and 45 hundredths, and there is a mixed number between that pair of rational numbers, and we can also reduce it for good measure. So -1, and both have a factor of 5, so -1 and 9/20. If I didn't want to reduce, then I might purposefully choose a number that won't reduce by that 100, so -1 and 41 hundredths. Okay. And at this point in time, you can complete the exercises in your textbook.